Nurx is a really interesting story that in many ways is very different from the one we just told about LabCorp. It is building a brand from a cold start and using digital channels to get there. Please welcome Nico.
All right, hello everybody. So excited to be here. I think one thing that, a lot of the conversation that we just had has been so important to our own growth in terms of the way that we've been thinking about brand. I am a performance marketer at heart, so I don't often think a lot about brand, but when we really reflect on how important it's been to Nurx and our story, a lot of these themes that we've been talking about in terms of accessibility in health, getting trust from patients, this has been a key part of our journey and how we've been able to grow as a company. So I'm really excited to talk about the way that brand has shaped our business from our early beginnings. So, Nurx is not an old company. We really started in 2016. Just was very curious, quick show of hands, how many people have heard of Nurx before coming to the conference? Okay, so a few people. So as Steve mentioned, we really started in contraception back in 2016. We're a specialty telemedicine business that has since expanded into other areas since our start. We now do diagnostics in sexual health. We've expanded into different areas of treatment in sexual health, such as herpes, and preventative medications, such as PrEP. We have since also launched into dermatology, and then we've also, even most recently, launched into mental health as of this year. And so we definitely compete with a number of other telemedicine businesses in our space. And this is where brand, as more and more competitors come into play, becomes incredibly important for our business in order to be successful and continue to grow. So just to give you a sense of how our business works, so typically a patient will come to either our website or will come to our iOS or Android apps, and will then start to go through the app and provide health information in a survey format. We'll collect this health information, and then from there, our provider will, in an asynchronous way, review the information. We'll follow up with the patient on questions that they may have in sort of this chat messaging format, and then we'll make a prescription, and that will then go to one of our pharmacies, and then the medication will ship out to the patient's doorstep. And then the relationship doesn't end there. It actually is an ongoing relationship where the patient will continue to hear from the provider, who will then check in to see if the health outcome was achieved and to understand how that evolves over time. So to kind of step back and give you a sense of what our journey has been going back to 2016. So in the early days, Nurx was founded by two young guys from Norway. One of them was our founder, Eddie, who was a practicing physician. He realized when he was practicing in Norway that a number of his patients had issues accessing birth control. And so he and one of his best friends wanted to start a business together, and they decided to come out to San Francisco or to Silicon Valley, like so many other starry-eyed entrepreneurs with a dream. And they got crushed actually in the early days. But after pounding the pavement for a while and keeping at it, they actually were able to find a pharmacy that would work with them so that they could then start and launch the birth control business. Shortly after some initial success, they were actually accepted into Y Combinator. And from there, they were able to launch and start the birth control business and really start offering a telemedicine offering. And then from there, shortly after, they got their Series A. And this is where the growth really started to scale for birth control. And a lot of press started to pick this up. There really wasn't anybody else at the time doing a similar thing for birth control in a telemedicine format. And this is where we were rapidly expanding and growing into thousands and thousands of patients by this point. And the press called us the Uber for birth control at that time. But yeah, so that great tagline. But what did that actually mean from a brand standpoint? And so that's where and we do call it a bit of a rebrand. But it wasn't a rebrand. It was more of deliberate thinking about what exactly we were doing and why people were coming to us. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But so we took some time to reflect on why is it that our patients come to us. And that thinking essentially led for us to be able to think, how can we then launch into other services as a platform? And then during this time, we continue to grow on traditional digital channels, Facebook and Google. But then we reached a point where we were ready to go into linear TV and start doing more mass channels, given that we were looking for that next level of scale. So from there, we also were starting to launch other services, and we started to launch sexual health and other treatments. And that was a big part of what we did in late 2019 and then coming into early 2020. And then, of course, we came into the global pandemic, and COVID happened in March 2020, and you can imagine how much that really energized all of telemedicine. So coming out of 2020, really there were a bunch of really great things happening for our business. So we were expanding rapidly because of this great tailwind supporting telemedicine through the pandemic. But then there was also a lot of the marketing that we were doing that was driving secular growth and growing into more mass channels. And then we were also launching new services, and that's when we launched Derm. And then even more recently, we have launched mental health as well. So Uber for birth control was a great tagline, but when we started to reflect on what it is that our brand, what is the foundation for our brand, and I mentioned this idea of accessibility, but we realized there were a lot of other key things, and I've heard different folks mention this so far at the conference, that the traditional healthcare system, there's definitely things that patients don't actually like about it. And what we distilled is that, well, on the one hand, a lot of patients don't actually trust the healthcare system. It's large, it's complex, it's impersonal, it's sterile. And these are things that we realized we knew that we could strike very stark contrasts in our offering as a telemedicine business. The other thing is this idea of control, this feeling that you have control over your health journey and your health history. So if you can imagine people that don't have insurance, depending on where you live in the world or in the country in terms of geography, whether you live in a healthcare desert where you can't access clinics or go to different types of services. So providing an accessible framework to these underserved communities has been a core part of what our offering is all about. And of course, even in today, we can see how that becomes even more so depending on the state that you live in, especially. So this is where, when we started to think about, well, what is our solution to these challenges? And so this is where we took this idea of accessibility, and this is what I heard us talk about in the LabCorp session, was this idea of empowerment and this idea of education. So from an empowerment standpoint, Nurx really focuses on ensuring this idea of access, right? So access enables empowerment, and it also provides the type of care that people are looking for. Because we're in a space like sexual health and contraception, it's very difficult to get some of those types of services in a way that meets what the patient is looking for. And so providing not only optionality, but also providing a very ultra-convenient experience in a way that is really cost-effective, starts to give the patient these tools to be able to access healthcare in a much more easier way. And so that's where we really see empowerment take shape in providing what the patient is looking for. So on the education front, this is where we've talked at the conference a lot about education and the role that investing in content and investing in these conversations that educate the patient on different areas of health. We see it even a little bit more different than that. So, and it's twofold. So on the one hand, I think we all know that you can go to WebMD and get a lot of health information. The way that we approach education is actually in trying to make that type of health information accessible and in the patient's language, so that they can actually understand what that means in relationship to their own lives, as opposed to something that sounds sterile and ultra clinical. And then on the other hand, there's this idea of stigma, where a lot of times patients, these are very sensitive issues that people don't always want to talk about, whether even with their provider, especially if they live in different types of states. And this is where we try to approach in a very positive way. And we actually think that by doing so, we get better health outcomes because the patient is more willing to discuss and share their history with us. And so breaking down stigma is a big part of the way that we approach education. So the way that by focusing on empowerment and by focusing on education, we've actually been able to really build trust in our brand. And the actual go-to-market side of that is by putting the provider first. I think one thing that I heard from Walmart yesterday is the idea of trust with Walgreens yesterday was the trust with the pharmacist. We've also heard that trust with providers is another key part of one of the few things of our healthcare system where patients actually do have trust. So putting the provider at the center has been a key part of establishing that trust. But the other thing that we do with our providers is they also are very passionate about women's health, and they're experts in what they do in providing contraception services and other services that we offer. And that's another key thing that we try to be very clear about in the way that we go to market. And then the second side of this is actually this idea of amplifying the patient's voice. And so by visually seeing and hearing from our patients in all of our different marketing touch points, we actually are able to make it very clear for would-be prospects that that people are heard here at Nurx, right? Because we're putting the patient everywhere, and patients from all walks of life that you see when you are a part of the Nurx experience. So I wanted to give you a sense of how this idea of focusing on a product that is affordable, ultra convenient, no matter where you live, and also speaks in a way that is approachable and accessible, stands out in the numbers and the ways that we serve our patients. So more than 60% of our patients are between the ages of 20 and 30. A huge amount of our patients, more than 50%, actually use cash. So you can imagine that if you don't have insurance, having access to these services really, really does matter, and to be able to access it in an affordable way. And then also a lot of our patients actually come from southern states, so places where you would call them maybe a healthcare desert, where some of these services are not available. So one way that we actually get a lot of this information and are able to put the patient front and center is we actually often will meet with our patients. We have photo shoots with them. This is an example of a photo shoot that we did recently where we spent the entire day with them. We interviewed them, and a lot of what we tried to do was capture their personalities. And this is what we showcase so that we have this true amplification of their voices across all of our different marketing touch points. So we just have a few different examples of some of our different patients, seeing how that kind of comes to life. So I talked a lot about, what makes Nurx unique in the marketplace. The other thing that I think really helps illustrate this is putting the contrast in terms of the contrast that says what we are not, right? So Nurx is not a one-time transaction. So I think there are different telemedicine businesses out there who may seem more like a pill factory. We instead are a place where people come not just for the medication, but for ongoing care. And where this becomes something that becomes even more complex and more ongoing is as we start to offer more and more specialty services, this relationship with the provider starts to deepen. The second is this approach to being very authentic and very approachable. So Nurx is not a confusing, sterile, cold environment. We are a patient-first, accessible brand that people actually feel like they can approach in a friendly way. The other thing is, I think we're in a place where, in a space where a lot of these things are hyper-stigmatized, as I mentioned, these health issues. And so a lot of what we do is try to be very clear that we are judgment-free. And so people can come to us with all their different, sexual practices and feel that they have an advocate on their side that is really trying to understand and unpack the best health outcome for them. And then the other thing is we are not exclusive. So it doesn't matter if you have insurance, where you live, we are open to all. And so that is a very important thing for patients to understand and see about our business. So I think one thing that I wanted to say, and this especially is important for a lot of folks who are performance marketers. So I think a lot of times we talk about brand marketing versus performance marketing. And one thing that I've seen a lot in our industry that's very easy to do is to look at what your competitors are doing, what type of ads they're running, and think that this leads to good performance. I need to replicate a lot of what they're doing in order to be successful and have direct response advertising. It's very easy for us to do that when we look at our competitors' Facebook ads, when we look at what our competitors are doing in search. And this is something that I think is actually kind of a slippery slope. And for us, this is where having a very clear identity in terms of who we are as a brand has allowed for us to not veer in that direction and stay and build this brand moat around what we do so that we're not going after and chasing our competitors' ads. And so this is where having that clear sense of who you are actually translates into real performance and has allowed for us to stand up in the marketplace when there's all these other brands that are doing similar things to what we're doing. So going back to this idea of education, because I mentioned that we do invest heavily in building blogs and providing that information through our providers, but we do think that going farther than just providing information is very important. And so what that actually translates into in terms of the type of content that we put out in marketing channels and the type of conversations that we have with our patients is really about this idea of breaking down stigma. And so that actually means going full force into topics that a lot of times people are uncomfortable talking about and positioning it in a way that is very positive so that people feel like they can approach us and share these very ultra-personal stories and that, by sharing this detail, actually leads to better health outcomes. So I'm going to give you an example just of how we actually approach this. So we talk about chlamydia in our marketing channels. We have things like say the do's and don'ts of safe anal sex. And I think that those are very taboo things that a lot of brands in different spaces are not comfortable talking about. But by talking about these things, it actually works, and patients feel that this is what authenticity looks like. And because of that, they're more willing to come to us and see us as a brand that they can trust. And I think that when you hide and not do some of these different things, that you actually are not really embracing this idea of authenticity. So we take this very seriously overall. So going back to one of the things that matters a lot in terms of figuring out what matters to patients and how we actually understand a whole variety of different decisions that we make, of course, goes back to the data, okay? And I think, we've talked a lot about, from the marketing perspective, third-party sources of data, first-party sources of data. But I think, from our perspective, it goes even beyond that, right? And it goes back to talking to our patients, as I said at the start, in terms of how we like to spend our time and understand the patient's journey. So the way that we collect data to make a whole variety of decisions in marketing, but also even in the types of services that we next invest in, also comes down to, so on the one hand, a lot of time and how we collect data from our patients. So one of the things that we do is we send tons of surveys out to our patients who are all very engaged. And we even do things like send out 1-question surveys to get a really high representation and high response rate on very pertinent things that we need to find out. And we'll ask things like, to assess, what types of new services that patients may be interested in that we could then expand into and make real investments behind by just understanding what our patients are interested in and what they demand. Another huge component that we actually turn to is our vast provider network. So our providers who are interacting with our patients, we collect a lot of those themes to understand what are the different types of things that they're dealing with patients, what are the things that they're communicating to patients, and that then gets collated and we then bring it into our marketing channels and the way that we invest in education. And then kind of taking a step back from that, another key part is understanding the overall journey of the patient. So where do they come from? What has their experience been with Nurx? And how long have they been sticking around? That full sort of spectrum of the journey. And that has allowed for us to do different personalizations in CRM, on our site, inside the product and the surveys, by understanding how that journey has taken shape. And it's really been able to unlock a lot of personalization features that has increased and deepened our relationship with our patients over time as well. So I did want to, so one thing that I hope I've convinced you is that we have been able to build a brand that people actually really trust and that they actually do love. I think one thing that really strikes me is that our patients are great advocates for us. They, we get a lot of advocation from our patients, but what's even cooler is that we actually recently launched a swag store. And, I actually don't think, how many people would go out and buy a t-shirt that is from Kaiser Permanente, right? Or United Health. Who wants to buy a t-shirt that says United Health? Well, it turns out our patients actually do want to buy things that say Nurx or hoodies that show Nurx. And to me, that actually says that we have actually done something right. And we've actually built a brand that people actually love. And it's very exciting to see. All right. And that's all I've got.
Nico, thank you so much. We have some time for questions for Nico. Do you have any questions? Nico's also going to be leading a roundtable on D2C brand building at the end of the morning. Okay, I have one. What are your key brand metrics? You are still at heart a performance-driven D2C brand. You've got investors who want you to stay on that path. And your DNA, like a good D2C, is performance. What metrics are you using to really measure brand improvement and that this all has impact?
Yeah, I think, a big part of that is, I think part of it is we talked about is we do a lot of surveys as well to assess, what is patient reception to some of the things that we're doing. We also do brand studies to broadly understand how much awareness is shifting in the marketplace. I think every time we launch a new service, understanding how awareness and product consideration changes in relationship to our marketing is another way that we're assessing is our messaging for the service and some of the marketing that we're doing for these new areas, how is that working? So we do track awareness on the brand level, but then also the product and service line level as well.
Attitude, sentiment. I'm curious if you know whether you've changed any minds.
Yeah, so we're very proud of our NPS, and so that's something that we consistently look to see how is that, how does that change over time? And it has actually been consistently really, really high, way above index for the industry. And to us, we then look at that versus, how are we doing versus our peers and the broader healthcare market overall. And that's a way for us to assess sentiment. We also do a lot of social listening, as we heard yesterday, how important that is. And that's another way for us to get more real-time information on how sentiment changes.
And a final lightning round question about media is you are, like many D2Cs, you are on a broad swath of media, many of them emerging channels. What are the best performing channels, and what are the surprise and upcoming channels for you to get this kind of creative and this kind of branding out?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm sure it's no surprise to a lot of folks that TikTok has become a very important channel in our space, especially if you're going after Gen Z and younger millennials. So TikTok, we have been rapidly investing in that outlet.
Straight ad buys or influencers?
So we've actually taken a unique approach where we do a network of influencers, and we then use that content and drive ads around them, and that has been tremendous for our growth. So,
okay, I could do this
Yeah.
forever, because I love grilling D2Cs on how they're growing their brand, and I love this brand, and Nico's been with us before, so he knows how to handle it. Nico, thank
All right,
you so
thank
much.
you.
He's going to lead a roundtable at the end of the morning.